Guys. Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm a heroin addict. Hi, family. So the funny part is that for the last couple of weeks leading up to this, I've been super anxious. I don't do well with large groups of people. And in my mind, since it was the World Convention, every week I started thinking there would be like hundreds and hundreds of more people, to the point where the last nightmare I had, it was like stadium seating, like thousands of people, and like little me on the stage. So you have no idea how grateful I am, as is my anxiety, that it's small. I just think, I'm almost better with like a topic because my sobriety date is February 10th, 2013, and what I have found is the longer I stay sober, the harder and harder it's been for me to recall the details. The book talks about this, like the strange mental blank spots that we have. And, when I came in, I thought, like, that's crazy. There's never going to be a day that I don't remember these things, but I just don't, and it gets more difficult the longer I stay sober. I also just, don't feel connected to that version of me anymore. I don't really underestimate my disease. I know that it's still in there. I know that, if I leave today and I stop going to meetings and I stop doing the work, I'll have a needle in my arm in a couple of weeks, maybe months, but it will eventually happen. But I just don't feel connected to that version of me anymore. I often joke that, when I forget, I can check my criminal record and I remember. But it's just a strange thing how that happens. I do want to say the speakers were great. It was great to hear Danny last night. I have been a part of putting on a convention, and I know that it is no small feat. So if we could just do a round of applause for all the people that worked on the convention. It's a lot of work. A lot of time, a lot of stress, and it came together beautifully. So thank you, everybody. Similar to some of the things that were said last night, right? Like, I'm 40. I feel like I'm the OxyContin generation. When I come from a long line of alcoholics and drug addicts. My parents were 17 when they first met out of rehab, and not surprisingly, they did not stay sober. They didn't stay together either. And so my grandma took over and raised me in the beginning. So the first 9 years were kind of calm, but all my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, everybody has addiction. And when I was 9, she passed away, and I went to go live with my mom. And it's like I went from being 9 to 29 overnight. And my disease just progressed really quickly. Pretty shortly after my grandma died, I had my first drink. And anything I did, I liked to do all the time, right? So when I started drinking, I wanted to do that all the time. And then I found weed, and then I found acid and mushrooms, ecstasy, and it was just like this intense infatuation every time. So, I wish this was smaller. I had a better place to put this. Let's put it there. And so when I was about 14, I started hanging out with a different crowd of people. I started dating this boy, Sean. He was a little bit older than I was, and we found opiates, We started hanging out with people who did Oxy. They had just kind of recently, I think, become a thing. This was like 1998, and the first couple years were a lot of fun, It's kind of sad to think that my drug addiction peaked from 14 to 17, but those were the good days. We could hang out at my house, my mom partied, and so we would stay up all night, we would play cards, and it was a lot of fun. And then, I think it was about 17, they started getting harder and harder to find. They became more popular, and the day came where we were looking to score. We called a bunch of people, and everybody was out, and everybody kept saying, like, out, but I got dope. And I remember Sean and I didn't even have to have, like, a discussion about it, Like, we knew that the answer was no. We weren't junkies, we weren't going to do that. And so we went home, young and naive, not realizing how far we were already in. We hadn't yet experienced, like, physical detox. And so we only made it, I don't know, a couple hours maybe. And that night we said, like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do it together. And then just so we don't get sick, and then tomorrow we're going to come up with a plan, and we're going to detox. And I think I said that same phrase to myself every night for the next 12 years. I just got to get well, and then tomorrow we're going to figure this out. I just got to get off sick, and then tomorrow I'm going to wake up and feel different, And there was a lot of attempts. I went to rehabs. One time Sean was actually able to get off, and he locked me in the bedroom of our apartment for like a week until I physically detoxed. But it did nothing, you know what I mean? As soon as I was out of that room, I didn't have a solution, and so I went right back. I started going to 12-step meetings. I think the first one I went to, I was 19. And there were times where I got, a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, and, I would go to meetings and they would say the same thing at all of them. We do the same thing. I've now been to meetings all over the world, and we say the same thing at all of them. You should get a sponsor. You should do the steps. You should go to 90 meetings in 90 days, get a home group, get a service position. And I just thought, like, these people don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I want to die every day. And, like, how is reading a book with another person going to stop that? And so I would never take the suggestions. I would never listen. And the strange thing is that at the end of 2012, I had stopped saying, like, tomorrow's going to be different, that I'm just going to get well and then tomorrow's going to be different. I had let that go. I had moved in with my drug dealer. I was so sick of waiting around parking lots, like Danny said yesterday, for 15 minutes, just going on for hours. And so I just showed up one day with a book bag and, like, moved in. Cut out the drive. I could no longer work. I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't be somewhere for 8 hours. And so I would, boost from stores or do whatever to survive. And I had fully accepted, like, that's what it was going to look like, and I didn't have the courage to kill myself. I had lots of failed attempts. And so best I could hope for was to, like, just go out on an overdose, and I was just biding my time. And then in, like, the beginning of 2013, I think, like, a series, I call them miracles, right? Like, they don't look like what most people would consider a miracle. It started with January 1st, New Year's Day. I got arrested. I was facing 2 felony charges. I started to have complications from my disease. I had to go to the hospital, and I was there for a couple of weeks. So I got arrested for the felony charges January 1st. I had a dozen U.S. Marshals kick down my mom's door January 10th. And then January 21st, I was checked into a hospital, and they told me I had to stay there for a couple of weeks. And so these things were just happening, like, in rapid succession, all at the same time. And the truth is, like, when I started coming around, it was not to get sober. Like, that was not my plan. I didn't want to go to prison, right? Like, that I had not experienced yet. It didn't sound like a good time. I figured I could still probably get high in prison, but, like, didn't want to do that. So I started coming to meetings and checked into an outpatient just to get a paper signed. And as soon as the court was over with, I was going to go back to what I was doing because it's all I knew. I'd started using so young. The idea of anything different was terrifying. And then, a lot of the time, so HA wasn't around when I first started getting sober. I would go to AA meetings and NA meetings, and some of those people I had seen, like, for years, when I would come in and out. one day I went to a meeting, and this woman, Susan, said my story. She talked about how she had been addicted to opiates, and she, that day, had 18 years sober, and she was a college professor. And I remember thinking, like, I could do that. Like I could be a college professor. And I like believed everything she was saying. The language she was using connected with me. And for the first time in my life, I thought, like, I believe what this woman's saying, and like I want what she has. And when I left that meeting, the women surrounded me and said, we're going to pick you up at 11 tomorrow, and we'll take you to the meeting. And I just said, okay. Danny talked about this last night, just like, okay. They said, we're going to take you to a meeting on Saturday. You're going to meet your sponsor there. And I did. That woman's still my sponsor 11 years later. And she said, you're going to come to my house every weekend, and we'll sit at my table and we'll go through the book. Okay. We walked into a meeting one day, and she said, this is going to be your home group, and that woman's going to tell you what your service position is. Okay. Step one, she had me write my story in 8 pages, and I remember thinking, like, this woman's going to dump me after this. She, in my mind, was like the classiest lady I had ever met. And so I was like, this is not going to go well. But she just like loved me anyway. Steps 2 and 3, I was a little concerned about because I didn't believe in God, and like jury was out if you guys were still a religious cult or not. Like I was pretty sure you were. And so like I definitely had my guard up. So instead, she took me to my grandma's grave and asked me to make a commitment that day that I would finish this thing through. And so I did. I got on my knees and I told my grandma that I would finish the steps, and I would try one last time. And the truth is, like, early sobriety was not easy for me. I wanted to get high every single day. I wanted to kill myself constantly. I would sit in these rooms and like stare at like those ceiling light fixtures and wonder if it would hold the weight of my body, just like fantasize about death constantly. But I kept showing up. I didn't have a job, so I went to 2 to 3 meetings a day. In 90 days, I probably did well over 200 meetings. I had multiple service positions, and I just tried to fill my time because I could not stand being alone for even a second. Even in my sleep, it was torture. The only thing that like left right away from getting sober was like I stopped stealing shit. Like I no longer boosted from stores. I didn't steal shit from people, but everything else was still on the table. I lied. I manipulated. I sold my medication the first year I was sober. Like I was not a saint walking around. Wanted to get high all the time, and I just kept coming. Like no matter what, I just kept coming. Step 4 and 5, I ended up having 99 people on my resentment list, which is too many. You shouldn't have that much. But I was pissed off at the world. I was so angry at everybody. And my sponsor sat with me that day. We sat for like 8 hours, and went through all of it. Shortly after that meeting of us doing that, I had gone to a Thursday night meeting, and I overheard her talking to one of her friends. She's actually here. I don't know if you've ever heard this story. She was talking to her friend Megan about how we had done my 5th step. And I thought for sure she was like going to share my secrets, And I was getting ready to like go in there and whoop their ass. Like I was so pissed. And so I like sat there and eavesdropped, and she didn't share my secrets, but she told this girl like we're very different, and like I could not love her more. And it just like smashed my heart open, I finally like felt connected to her. 6 and 7 was interesting for me to like look at my character defects, which are all things in just extreme versions, right? Like they all started with a purpose, for me to survive. Taking a look at some of that stuff was interesting. 8 and 9 was really hard for me. I can't remember if the book talks about this or if people just told me in meetings to like start with easy ones. And I felt like all of mine were hard. First, when we do the columns like now, later, never, all my people were in never, except for two. My ex-boyfriend, who definitely needed to know I was sober, and that I was now better than him, and my best friend, Bianca. I'll rewind a little bit. When I was 2 months sober, I decided I was ready to like make amends to Bianca. We had lived together in California. She was still out there. And so I called her, and like my plan was to apologize and get to be friends again because we hadn't spoken in months. I did so much damage on that phone call. I ended with like screaming at her, like, but what about me? What about the things you did to me? You're an asshole. Like that's how my amends went. And I did so much damage that day that still to this day, 11 years later, she will not take my call, And so don't do step work unsupervised. That was a big mistake. And so neither of them would take my call, and so I moved on to like what I thought would be easy ones, And what I discovered, it was really hard when I asked people what I left out. The things they would say, I had no idea, My friend Courtney had told me that we would make plans, and she would come to pick me up, and I wouldn't answer the door. And she would sit there with her ear to the door to try to see if she could hear me and make sure I was still alive. When we went out, I would just disappear, and she wouldn't know if she was going to see me again. And so I said, what can I do to make it right? And she said, you can stay sober, and you can start showing the fuck up, like show up for me the way I showed up for you. And they were all kind of hard. There was a lot of people who just wouldn't take my phone call, and like the realization that I had done that much damage was really hard. 10 was challenging for me, this idea of like writing an inventory every night. I'm really good at like telling you all the things I did wrong, so I wouldn't look at my day objectively of like what I had done well. I just used it as a baseball bat, to beat myself with. 11, I was willing to meditate, not willing to pray. People talked about like choosing your own conception of God, which didn't make a lot of sense to me because my entire life people tell you what God is, and how to believe in it and how to pray to it. But somebody had suggested a group of drunks, group of drug addicts. Again, it was AA, HA wasn't around, but that worked for me. Instead of like praying at home at night, I would go to people in AA and like tell them what I was struggling with, and they would give me a solution, and I would just follow that. And then shortly before I had a year sober, this little girl, Amanda, asked me to sponsor her. I thought it was a terrible idea because I, again, wanted to get high every day. I wanted to kill myself. And, the first time you sponsor, your perception is not what it actually is. I was like, I can't be in charge of this little girl's life, like I'm going to kill her. And my sponsor said, you're going to do it. And so I said, okay. And we started working together. And what I found is like, I just loved this girl, I had never known what unconditional love was until then, like this idea of like love without limitations, without conditions against her. When she struggled and was sad, I was sad. When she accomplished things, like the pride I felt was overwhelming. We ended up working together for about 5 years, and oh my God, I just loved her, so much. And one day I was leaving my sponsor's house, and the thought occurred to me, like, if I love this girl this much, without limitations, without conditions, it is very plausible that my sponsor loves me just as much. And I feel like things changed from there on, One day I realized I hadn't thought about getting high in a long time. Shortly after, I realized I hadn't thought about killing myself in a long time. And things started to get easier with that, people, again, I use this idea of group of drunks, right? And so I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a job. People told me to go to this place, Access VR, that they would help me go to school or figure out what I wanted to do. Went there. They suggested 3 things. I no longer can remember what the 3 are, but one of them was real estate. And I said, I'll get back to you. I went back to meetings and I told people, they're asking me to choose one of these 3 things. And everybody said, you should do real estate. So I went back and I said, everybody says I should do real estate. If you had asked me the night before, like what I was going to, I had no idea. You know what I mean? It didn't really matter to me. And 11 years later, I have like an incredibly successful business of my own in real estate. When I first started, not to like get too far in the weeds of like the business part, but I was trying to figure out like what my thing was going to be, like what my path was going to be in this. And people told me to just like try to use God as my North Star and like be a woman of integrity. And that worked, slowly but surely, like people started coming to me and asking me for help. And it's mine, it's like all mine. And it was the first time I like did something, I completed it, and I was super proud of it. And then like slowly I started taking on more women to sponsor. That is like definitely where my strength comes from, is sponsoring women and like the women in my life. I have also like fantastic men in my life, right? My partner and I have been together for 11 years. He's also sober. He's probably one of the most like calm people you will ever meet. And so that's helpful for me because I'm not. My friend Christopher's like super involved in service, which is always like a good example for me that like I could always do more. He talks about how service requires sacrifice. It's not always convenient, but my recovery is not they're not a foundation of my recovery, right? The women in my life are my sponsor, my sponsees, my friends. Like some of these women pulled me out of incredibly dark places. A couple years ago, it was like the end of 2020, maybe 2021. I struggle with mental health stuff. I try to be like super open about that. And so I was like not in a good place and needed help. I was going to meetings, I was talking to people, but I was having like a lot of disassociative episodes and just feeling like super checked out. And then I met this girl, and she like made it her job to bring me out of this funk. She would like plan all these day trips constantly. She like took me to some weird animal encounter where we got to like hang out with sloths, feed penguins, And afterwards she was like, do you feel better? And I was like, no. But the sloths were cool. And then one day she like tricked me out of jumping out of a plane, which is something I never wanted to do. And was so terrified. But I did it. And the truth is, like, the experience itself was great, right? But, beforehand, she's super excited. I am not. You have to, like, sign your life away. And then if you die, you also have to say that, like, your estate won't sue them either. Like, and just over and over again, you have to sign so many things saying, like, I'm aware I'm going to die and it's fine. And so I was like, this just does not seem like a good idea. But I did it, right? And like, that was cool. But afterwards, she actually didn't have a great experience. She got super nauseous. And so we're leaving, right? And I'm like on cloud 9. I'm so excited. This was so cool. And she's like ready to throw up. And that's what did it for me. I was like, God, this girl, like, this is what we do in the rooms, right? Like, we don't just like offer a helping hand. Like, when someone's in a hole, we get in the hole with them, and we climb out together. And like the drive home that day, I just thought, like, where else in the world, right, that can you meet people and they just show up for you in this like incredible way? And I have somebody said early on to me, like, you should have like 5 people in your life, right, that you could call if shit hits the fan, and you don't have to download them on your life, that they're like caught up and up to date with everything, as are you with them, right? And I have that today. Today I have probably 5 to 7 women in my life. They all do something different for me, one gets me out of my isolation shell. Like, I am not a social butterfly. Groups of people overwhelm me, and she forces me to get out. One is like super vulnerable and like very good at emotional conversations. Also, I am not, I'm probably as deep as a puddle, and like I enjoy that, like I would prefer everything to be at surface level. It's very hard for me. And at the same time, I'm like very aware that it's all like built up inside of me and one day it's going to explode. But I don't like feelings. I'm happy with other people's, right? When other people are vulnerable, I love that shit. Just do not like it out of me. But this one girl is very good about like being vulnerable and checking in on me and like getting that out of me. I would say actually probably 4 out of the 7 I have in my life are like very in tune with their heart and their emotions and bring that out of me. And so like I have this foundation of women that have saved me, over and over and over again. Like during COVID, I thought I was going to lose my mind. I'm not someone that's good with idle time at all. I get really depressed. Like that's when my mental health gets worse. And like one of the girls, right, would like force me to go out and like go on hikes with her, just to like get out of the house and stay busy. So they all have saved my life in like different ways. And then, so that's my experience, right? That's where my strength comes from. My hope. The crazy part is like, today I believe in God, which is not something I wanted or cared for at all. I built like a beautiful life in recovery off that idea of group of drunks. Like that worked for me for a long time. And then when COVID happened, we were on Zoom, but I wasn't seeing people as often, and my God had to get bigger. And I remembered that people talked about choosing your own conception of God. And so I started listening to people, like the things they said at meetings. I would ask people like how they prayed, what they believed in. And the answers were so different, and I started to realize that like what I had been told all my life was religion, not God, that the two were separate, at least for me. And I just started like latching onto things people said, right? I went to a meeting one day and this girl, Megan, talked about how God loved her so much that her God carried her picture in its wallet, and I thought, God, like, what must that feel like, to like be so confident that God loves you, and is looking out for you. And then on Wednesdays, there's a Came to Believe meeting in Rochester, and I started going to it. For years, people told me to go to it, but I wasn't interested. And we read parts of Came to Believe, and then people talk about it. And not everybody believes in God in that meeting. I went there one time, and a woman was talking about how she wanted to believe so bad. She was actually crying. She said, I'm struggling right now. Her son was really sick. And she said, I want to believe in God so much, but I just can't. I can't get there. And some people talk about like how they found God, what they believe in. And one day I was at this meeting. My friends have probably heard this story a ton of times, but it was like life-changing for me. I was at this meeting, and this guy, Jeffrey, was talking about how his friend's kid had died. And people just don't know what to say, right? So they were like, oh, she's in a better place now. She was 5, I think, and had gotten hit by a car. She's in a better place now. God wanted his angel back. Whatever we say to like try to comfort people. And this guy Jeff said, like, I don't believe that to be true. Like, I think God was devastated that day. Like, God cried with us. And as soon as he said it, it was very similar to my experience with that woman, Susan, right? When I believed what she said and I wanted what she had, to get sober. That day when Jeff said that, I believed what he said and I wanted that. That was like the version of God that I wanted, which has more humanistic like characteristics, right? Human characteristics. And as he was talking, like my whole life flashed before my eyes. I saw, like when my grandma died, like I saw God holding my hand. In 2017, Sean, my ex, we didn't stay together. Our addiction just couldn't last. And we dated for 6 years, and then afterwards we became best friends. We were a part of each other's lives since we were kids. And then in 2017, he had relapsed. And he killed himself. And he had called me before and said, like, I can't do it anymore. Like, it's so painful. And in this meeting when Jeff was talking, right, like I saw that night in my mind, I saw me like laying in fetal position on the floor. And I saw like an image of God also in fetal position on the floor, like feeling it just as much as I did. Like I don't believe that was part of God's plan. I think God was devastated. When I first started getting high, it was me, Sean, and this kid, Brandon. The three of us went everywhere together. In 2014, Brandon killed himself. And then in 2017, Sean killed himself. And everyone that I ever got high with is now dead, mostly from overdoses, but a lot of suicides. And, that was hard for me, right? Like I don't deserve it any more than they did. And I do talk about their deaths a lot because what's interesting to me is like Sean was coming to meetings, and like this idea of like who needs it, who wants it, who does it. The truth is like I probably needed it more. I was definitely way worse. Sean probably wanted it more for sure, and but I did it. You know what I mean? I just kept showing up. And he stopped. And so the end results were very different, but like that's what happens. We get to this like jumping off place. And I forgot right until that night that him and I talked that like not everybody jumps off to get sober. Like some people just jump and that's it. So like I try to talk about him a lot so people know, and like in the book, I think it talks about this, like the book of AA, but it talks about like if you're not sure, like go try some controlled drinking, and I used to say that to people, like if you have doubts, all right, go try. And then like so many people that I love died, or kept dying, and like now I just don't. When people are struggling and they're not sure, I just like beg them to stay. Like especially with heroin addiction, like there are no guarantees. This shit is fatal. I've lost so many people, far better than I. And I just don't know if it's worth the gamble, and it does slowly start to get better. I mean, again, I can't explain that enough, that like I desperately wanted to get high. Every day, like the voices in my head tormented me constantly, especially after Brandon, my first friend, died. Like it was just like, what are you doing? You don't deserve to be here. You don't deserve this seat. But it gets better. And so now, right, having those experiences in that meeting that night, just like I literally walked out of that room a different person, and And now there is like nothing you can say or do to like shake my belief in God. You know, like it is within me. And I'm listening to this autobiography of this guy who's an addict. Spoiler alert, he relapses and is now dead. But he talks about recovery. And he talks about how OxyContin, when he did it, it was like replacing his blood with warm honey. And I get that, you know. And then also, right, like I would almost say that day, taking like God into my life did almost the same thing, right? I just like felt good, you know, and I felt better about the world, you know, this idea that like God is this thing in the sky. The one saying that I hate is when people say like, when we make plans, God laughs. Like, not my God. My God doesn't laugh at me, you know? My God's not setting up like, do you remember the game of like Mousetrap, right? Like God's not setting up, is what I used to envision, like, oh, wrong turn, and like the trap drops down at you. And like that's not my version of God, you know? God wants me to win. Like God wants me to have a good life. And if I make mistakes, like God's not gonna start torturing me to try to get me back in line, you know? Like it's gonna be devastated, but it's not gonna abandon me. And so there's time, I often say this a lot, that like if Junkie Shannon would meet this version of me, right, if she walked in right now and heard me talking about God, she would come up here and like punch me in the throat, you know, like just, I just never thought that this is what it was gonna look like, you know. And then the rest of my hope comes from like watching people come in and get sober. You know, like some of the stories I get to listen to. I have a sponsee who served time in federal prison. She's now married with 2 kids and is a nurse. When she started down the road of becoming a nurse, she just had this confidence that this is what she was supposed to do. And we could not find anyone. We called so many people, and we were trying to find people that had federal charges, right? And got licensed, and we couldn't find anybody. And you know, she would call these numbers, right, to try to ask people like, you know, if I do this, will I get my license? Will they approve it? And no one could give her an answer, you know. And so we got quiet together one day, and I just said, like, if you're gonna do this, you're just gonna have to have blind faith that like at the end of all the school, all the studying, all the tests, that they're going to approve you, and you're not going to know until that day. And because God is beautiful, right? Like, I got to be there that day when she got the call, just by happenstance. The guy who was helping her, so she studied her ass off, went to school, killed it, got you know, I don't know if they were all A's, but they were pretty high. And so once you're done and you've graduated, then you can apply for licensing. And the guy said that he would call her, you know, sometime between 8 and 5 on this day. And we happened to have a plan to meet that day at a park. And we were sitting there, and as soon as she came and sat down, the call came, you know. And like as she was answering it, she was like, I'm so happy that like you get to be here right now, one way or another, you know. The guy that was helping her said, like, I literally can't tell you what their answer is going to be. You know, it's 50-50. And, oh my God, it was torture. This guy was so monotone. When so she puts the phone on speaker, and he's not like, hey, got great news. You know, he was like, hello, is this, I'm not going to say her name, but insert name. And she was like, yeah, it's me. And he was like, so they met. Longest pause ever. And we're like, okay. He's like, they met, they made their decision, and you've been approved. And I was like, I almost thought that I didn't hear it correctly, right? I thought, because at least put some, you know, pep in your step about it, you know what I mean? I was like, this fucking guy, oh my God. And she had to like ask him again. She was like, wait, like I am getting approved. And he was like, yeah, getting approved. Isn't that what I just said? So bizarre, but, and then when she got off the phone, I mean, we just like held each other and cried, just like blind faith. And it took years for her to go to this school, right? And like get these grades and then go through the tests and the exams, and like she had a lot of doubt. And we would pray and she would say like, and I would say like, do you feel like are you supposed to be anything else? And she would say, no, I'm supposed to be a nurse, and so, all right, then we're going to keep going. I have sponsees that I've worked with that, again, like served time in prison, escorted, boosted from stores, like, especially in the Heroin Anonymous. When I got sober in AA, I feel like some of the stories are way more mild, like, when my husband was work, I was like sneaking booze. And let me be very clear, like the feeling is still the same, right? Like 100%. But I feel like when you come to, once HA started coming around and I was like, oh, these stories are a little bit more in line with mine. When I first got sober and someone asked me to speak at a meeting when I had like 3 months. Oh my God, it was so bad. When I get nervous, I start talking really fast. And so I definitely shouldn't have been sharing. And so I went to this AA meeting to share, and I swear it felt like it was all just like a bunch of soccer moms. They were all driving minivans. It was in Pittsford, which is like a nice town in Rochester. And I didn't know, right? Like I had 3 months. And so I just told the most graphic stories about being an IV drug user and spoke so fast. Like, I like went through, and granted I had 3 months sober, so it's not like I'm sharing a lot of the solution. But afterwards, I like remember looking at my clock and I was like, oh my God, I just did all of that in like 5 minutes, And then I was like, there you go, and like the looks of horror on their face. Oh my God, I just used to share so graphically. In a lot of ways, I'm like super grateful for going to AA because it taught me to like tone some of that down. Yes, it's a part of my story, but it also doesn't matter. Like the more I would go to AA meetings, I would hear people talk about, my sponsor says this. She went to a meeting one time and this guy talked about being on like the most beautiful beach, I think in Thailand, and feeling absolutely nothing. And like, I know that feeling, and we're all the same, right? Like Danny said this a bunch of times yesterday, like one of many, just one of many. And sobriety has been a wild ride, like for me, there very much is like a before and after. The version of me today looks absolutely nothing like the version of me in 2012, and it hasn't all been perfect. I think someone told me once, like statistically, if you look at people drop off between like 5 and 8, I think it is, and that almost happened to me, right? People had told me when I first started getting sober, right, all the things. Get a sponsor, meet that sponsor, do the steps. You're going to start sponsoring people, get a home group service position. And so, like, I have just always done those things. But in a couple years into my business, like, it started taking off. I started working a lot. I became very consumed with this idea of, like, success. I had never grown up with money, and, like, I wanted to have money. I wanted to buy happiness. I thought that was going to give me a lot of freedom. And it got to the point where I was working 80 plus hours a week, and like working, it's a long story, but I was working with this crazy guy who was a drug addict, and he would call me at midnight, all jacked up, and like talk for 2 hours, which was like really hard for me because obviously I'm a downer girl, like I like to slow down, and he was an upper guy, and so I was just like, oh my God, this is so annoying. But I would be on the phone with him till 2 o'clock in the morning. I just worked all the time. And slowly but surely, like a lot of those things that were a part of my foundation started to slip away. I would go to meetings and I would fall asleep in the meeting, especially if it was like a book study, like people reading. I would just zonk out. I was tired all the time, and it started to become more of a checklist to me, like I no longer went to multiple meetings a week. I would go to a meeting, and it was my home group, and it was just so everybody knew I hadn't relapsed, really, because I hate that when you like stop going to a meeting and then you go again and you haven't seen people in a while, and they're like, haven't seen you in a long time. How is everything? And you're like, I didn't relapse. Like, I just moved. I didn't want to come to this meeting anymore on the west side. And so I would go to my home group, right? And it was just like checking boxes. I would do my service position, check, 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 all emotion taken out of it. And things got pretty dicey, like my behavior, some of the things I did dead sober are terrifying to me, like the sick version of me got bigger and bigger. I would verbally assault my staff. I made a grown man cry one day because I was just berating him, and then I made fun of him for crying. And I did that dead sober. I did that. I think I had 5 years sober when I did that. And my sponsor kept saying, like, I'm worried you're going to relapse. Like, I'm worried you can't keep up with this schedule. And I would think, like, I'm crushing it, like I'm crushing it at life. Like, look at all the things I was able to buy. I bought this fancy car. I have these nice clothes. I was very excited that I had bought one of the robot vacuum cleaners. So for a while, I don't know. So, no, we had a husky, right? And our husky shed a lot of hair. And I am obsessed with a clean house. And I would come home at night after working, 14, 15 hours, and I would think, like, my life is unmanageable because this house is dirty, because of the dog hair, and Andrew's not cleaning enough, and I do everything. So I had become obsessed with this idea that if I had gotten this robot vacuum cleaner, that it was going to change my life, I mean, like, obsessively, like, looking at reviews and then deciding to buy one. And I know they're more advanced now, but at the time, things sucked, right? As soon as it hit, like, the carpet lip, it would just stop working, and then, like, error, and, like, kept running around in circles. It was not as life-changing as I hoped it was going to be. And then finally one day, thank God, right, like I bottomed out. I had this emotional bottom that could have, again, coming to that jumping off place, right, which I could have jumped off somewhere else. I was dangerously close to a relapse, and I don't think I fully realized that until there's a reason why there's a saying like hindsight's 20/20. I can see it so clearly now, but I couldn't see it then, like how dangerously close I was to a relapse. But luckily, right, I had enough people around me to like support me, and I made some big changes in my life, and recovery became like this center point again. And so I try to hold on to that, right? I try to keep doing those things. Like years ago, I heard someone say, like, there is no advanced program, right? Like, it's all HA 101. There is no advanced program. Sure, there's levels of emotional sobriety, but like the foundations are always the same. Have a home group. Have people in your life that are in recovery that can support you. Sponsor people. Like for me, that was the key, right? I thought about getting high until I started sponsoring someone, and like that last puzzle piece was put in. You have to give it away in order to keep it. Have to. And those things have saved my life so many times, and like now it would take some work for me to get out of recovery, right? Like if I stop showing up, people know where I live, so they're going to call, they're going to show up. For sure, Jenna's going to show up at my house and be annoying and like knock on the door. It would actively take some work to like get out of it, and like thank God for that. I don't know, man. Like, I love recovery. I love this version of me that I've become. Very early on, that same woman, Susan, she had told me, I'm going to finish with this. It's one of the most favorite things someone ever told me, but she said, when Michelangelo was asked how he created the statue of David, he said it was simple. I just took a stone and removed everything that wasn't David. And like, I think that's what happens in recovery, right? Like, I don't necessarily know that we morph into somebody else. I think we just shed these layers, right? Like, a lot of these things that I did were for survival. You know, like, I was living in a tough world, right? And I had to survive. And slowly but surely, those things have just gotten shaved off of me, where I've become like the most authentic version of myself. And I feel that, you know, like, I try to be a better version today than I was yesterday. I try to do a little bit more today than I did yesterday. I try to leave people and places better than I found them, you know? And when I just live by that motto, like, I stay close to this thing. And today I do feel like the most authentic version of myself. You know, even my partner and I were laughing, like, in early sobriety, I would do all the things, right? Like, I would have been in the dance party till 2 o'clock in the morning. I would have been at the yoga meditation thing at 7:30. I went to all of it just because, like, I needed to be around people and I needed you to like me. The most authentic version of myself is very antisocial. You know, so like, I have no problem with people knowing that. I have no problem saying no to things now. You know, like, it's important for me to, like, be myself, and be true to myself, and like, take care of myself. So I love recovery, which means I love every single one of you. And again, thank you so much for, like, asking me to share, for being here, and for everybody that put on this convention. It's no small feat, so thank you.